U.S. President Donald Trump continues to expand his presence by sitting down with world leaders. Now, how can South Korea make sure that it doesn't get left out of Trump's diplomacy? We are joined by Professor Andrew Millard this morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
So after holding his first summit talks with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Trump is now set to meet the Japanese Prime Minister this week. The question is, why do you think Trump picked Japan to hold his second summit with?
So this is a very important summit. So obviously he's met with the Israeli Prime Minister because the Israel-Gaza war is a very important one right now. But also this second summit with Prime Minister Ishiba, this is really reflecting the importance of Northeast Asia as a whole. But it's also important that we look at who is visiting who. Now, in this case, this will be Prime Minister Ishiba traveling to Washington to visit with President Trump. Right. Now, this also sort of signals that Donald Trump has, remember, only been in office now, again, for the second term, for less than 3 weeks. And he's been very active during this time. Prime Minister Ishiba has only been in office for a few months in Japan, but I think it signals that the Japanese government, they're very sort of wary of President Trump's activeness, and they want to head over to Washington as quickly as possible to sit down with President Trump, develop a very good relationship, discuss several issues. So they'll be discussing defense issues, in particular North Korea, maritime issues with the Chinese Navy, economic issues, and so on. So it's a very important summit, but I would say it suggests a little bit more that Japan is more of the instigator of this summit.
Well, good for Japan, but for South Korea, we have been going through a rough time ever since the martial law order was issued last December, which means that diplomacy is not at the forefront, especially with the country's leadership at risk. How should South Korea be worried that no Seoul-Washington summit is in sight?
Well, as you say, right now, diplomacy, it's not at the forefront of South Korean politics. And to be honest, that's rightly so. So right now, we have these domestic issues in South Korea with the impeachment process of President Yoon. Now, what South Korea needs to be careful of, it's not to rush through this process just to create a new leader. What South Korea needs to show the whole world, not just the US, but the whole world, is that South Korea, it has these democratic institutions. It has these democratic processes. It's not going to rush through those just so that it can have a leader on the global stage. Now, having said that, obviously, we do need a new leadership. Having a new leadership will be very important. And so once we get this new leader, whether that's a continuation of the Yoon government or whether it's a new government, then it'll be important. But also, I think for South Korea, when President Trump was last in office, South Korea was a bit of a target for the Trump government. They renegotiated the FTA. There were defense talks. Because all of that happened in the first term, I don't think it's as important for the second term. So I think the good relations between the US and Korea, despite the lack of Korean leadership right now, they will continue.
So you're saying that we can take our time to, get settled down first and then build, a new relationship with Trump.
Exactly.
Then, Professor Millard, how can we approach the Trump administration so that we don't get left out in the meantime?
So right now, this is really the role of the ambassadors. So even though there's no president right now in office in Korea, we do have an acting prime minister. But more importantly, this is where the role of the ambassadors will be much more important. So right now in America, we have Jo Hyun-dong, who's the acting ambassador for the Republic of Korea to America. His role should be very active to go to the various ministries, if he can, to the White House, just reaffirm that South Korea is open for business. Everything is going as normal. Again, we have this impeachment process, but these democratic processes, we're not going to rush through those. Everything is in order in South Korea. There's nothing to worry about. We are open for business.
Well, Professor Millard, speaking of ambassador, the formal appointment of Kim Dae-gi, he is the ambassador designate to China, and President Yoon's former chief of staff, that appointment has been delayed because of the whole Yoon's impeachment trial. Now, isn't this a big concern that the post is vacant, especially when we see another trade war growing between the U.S. and China?
Exactly. So right now, as you said, this trade war, it's starting to grow. Donald Trump, he's only been in office again for a few weeks, but we're seeing very quick responses. And so the fact that South Korea, it doesn't have an ambassador in China, this is quite worrying. So I know that the Speaker of the National Assembly for Korea, he's in China this week. I think it's Won-sik. So that's a very important step, but he's only going to be there for a few days. The Chinese government, when they want to connect with South Korea to talk about economic issues, defense issues, whatever, here, the fact that there's no ambassador, the fact that there's no acting president in Korea, this is a little bit worrying given all of these very fast moving issues that are happening right now.
It is indeed. Professor Millard, I'm sure you remember back in summer 2023, we saw the historic Camp David trilateral summit between Seoul-Washington and Tokyo. Can something similar to this happen again during the Trump administration, or is it pie in the sky, or is it too early to speak about that?
I would say it's a little bit too early, and not just because of President Trump, because the whole summit will have potentially a complete leadership change. Back in 2023, it was President Biden for the US, Prime Minister Kishida for Japan, and President Yoon for Korea. Potentially, if President Yoon is removed from office, then the three leaders from all three countries will change. So there's a lot of variables that we need to look at in that situation. Potentially, it could happen, though.
Alrighty, Professor Millard, thank you so much for joining us this morning. We appreciate it.
Thank you.